This is day 1 of making a sourdough starter from scratch. If you're seeing this video and you're not quite ready to start on your sourdough journey, save this video for later and then you can come back and follow along at your own pace. I'm one of those people that has to understand how things work in order for me to be successful, so I'm going to share a little bit about what I've learned about sourdough that might help you. What is the difference between sourdough starter and store-bought yeast? They're both yeast, but commercially grown yeast is usually one strain, and when combined with water and sugar, it eats the sugar and then behaves very predictably. Sourdough starter contains wild yeast, which is more than one strain and also contains good bacteria from the environment. Yeast is everywhere. It's on surfaces, it grows inside of your body, it's even in the air. Where it also exists is on flour grains. When you use flour and you mix it with water, what you're doing is you're giving the yeast an environment to wake up and thrive in. The type of flour, it does matter, because if you use something like all-purpose flour, those grains do not contain as much wild yeast as whole wheat flour. So I like to start it with whole wheat. You can also use rye flour, just something where it naturally contains a lot more yeast. Now I'm also going to be very exact and use a scale, but I'll also give you the cup measurements as well. I'm setting it to grams and I zero out the food scale, okay? Because you want to make sure it's not weighing the glass. It's going to be equal parts flour to water. 60 grams flour. Now I'm going to zero the scale out again and add 60 grams of water. This is about a quarter cup. So now we have this mixture here, and you want a long, sturdy utensil to mix this around. I also really like using these wide mouth jars because it can be kind of hard to stir. So I'm just gonna go around and give it a really good mix. You don't want any dry pieces of flour. Something to keep in mind when you're making this, a lot of online instructions will tell you that the consistency should be like pancake batter. And that is true. If you were using all-purpose flour, it would be a lot more wet. But when you use whole wheat flour, that absorbs a lot more water. So it's actually gonna look more like Play-Doh. I'll show you. It is not pancake batter. What we're going to do is we're gonna loosely cover it. If you have a jar with a seal, you do not want to seal the jar. So you don't wanna like twist it shut. If it's like a mason jar, you don't wanna twist it shut. You're just gonna leave this on your counter. And that's day 1. I'll see you tomorrow. This is day 2 of making a sourdough starter from scratch. When you check your starter, you might notice these little bubbles. You should see them. They should be kind of irregular. So what we're gonna do, just on day 2, we're gonna skip a feed. The point of skipping the feed today is we're trying to drop the pH level. When you drop the pH levels, you create a more acidic environment, and that is something that is really good for your wild yeast and the lactic acid bacteria. Right now, you want to think of it as like a tug-of-war situation. You have our wild yeast and lactic acid bacteria versus other microbes that we don't necessarily want in here. The other microbes that we don't want like a more neutral environment. So when we reduce the pH levels, it kind of weakens them, and then it allows the wild yeast to take over. All we're gonna do is just give it a mix. You'll notice that it's a little bit softer than yesterday, but it's still pretty stiff. And what we're doing is we're mixing this up just so that we redistribute everything. I'll see you tomorrow. This is day 3 of making a sourdough starter from scratch. As you can see, we've had a lot more activity on day 2. I'm gonna show you how to do your first feeding. To feed your starter, it's gonna be equal parts starter to water to flour. What we're gonna do is we're gonna discard half of this. The only reason you discard sourdough starter is because the jar is only so big. So the more flour and water that you add to feed the starter, the more space it's gonna take up in the jar. Get rid of 60 grams. And you can always eyeball it and just remove half if you feel like you're comfortable doing that. As the daughter of a plumber, I feel obligated to tell you, do not put this down your drain, okay? You will have cement forming in your pipes. You wanna throw this in the trash can. We know we have 60 grams in here, so we're just gonna do the same routine again, and I'm gonna add 60 grams of flour. I'm gonna still use the whole wheat, but you can totally switch over to bread flour or all-purpose. And then 60 grams of the lukewarm water. Give it a good mix. Your jar might start to get a little janky over time. You just need to make sure you scrape down the sides as best you can. That's how that should look. Now cover it, leave it on the counter, and I'll see you tomorrow. This is day 4 of making a sourdough starter from scratch. Do not be alarmed if on day 4 your starter looks pretty lazy and you don't see any of those nice air pockets. It's also way more liquidy now, and as you can see, there is this dark layer on the top. That is totally normal. That is part of the fermentation process. So now we're just gonna do a regular feeding, because at this stage, I do not save the discard. It doesn't really do me any good unless I wanna make another starter. So right now, there's 180 grams of starter because of what we fed it last time. So what I think I'm gonna do is I'm actually just gonna reduce this down to 60 grams again so that I can have 60 grams of water and flour added. That's just gonna save me product. So I'm zeroing out my scale and it's pourable now, so I'm just gonna pour it into this cup. So now we have our 60 grams of starter. I'm gonna discard this, and remember, this goes in the trash. If you're not trying to make another starter, this goes in the trash can, okay? Not down your sink. It's also a really good idea to wipe down the sides when you get starter on it on the top. I'm gonna add in my 60 grams of flour, 60 grams of the room temperature filtered water. I lost some of that. And mix it up. A lot of you thought I didn't cover the sourdough, but yes, you wanna cover it. This is the lid that my jar came with. It just doesn't have a seal on it, so it just rests on it. That allows the gases to escape. And that's day 4. I'll see you tomorrow. This is day 5 of making a sourdough starter from scratch. As you can see, it has been another uneventful day, which is totally normal and expected. So we're just gonna feed it again. Like we did before, zero out your scale. We're gonna discard 120 grams to keep 60 grams. And now I will feed it with more whole wheat. So 60 grams of flour and 60 grams of water. Give it a good mix. Very pasty again. I'm gonna wipe off the rim again so I don't create an accidental seal. This is the point where everyone's is gonna start developing at a completely different pace. So if yours seems a little bit behind or ahead, that's totally normal. There are a lot of things that affect how your sourdough develops. One good rule of thumb about your sourdough starter is even if it doesn't show any activity, as long as it has no pink or orange fuzz on top, is probably fine. So now we'll just cover it, set it on the counter, and I'll see you tomorrow. This is day 6 of making a sourdough starter from scratch. If your starter looks like this, that means your yeast is waking up. Good things are happening here, but we are not yet ready to make a sourdough with this. So it's just not strong enough yet. But seeing this is a really, really good sign, and you're almost there. You'll notice on the top, there's some bubbles and it's really runny. See how it's kind of fibrous looking? That's what you want. So just like before, discard 120 grams. I'm gonna add the 60 grams of flour, 60 grams of lukewarm filtered water, mix, cover, and I'll see you tomorrow. This is day 7 of making a sourdough starter from scratch. All right, we officially have some yeast activity here. It was a little bit higher and it fell. So it did its first little rise and fall. So the way you know there was a rise and fall when you weren't watching is you'll notice that there's like this very distinct clean line here. That's what that is. It rose to here and then it slid back down. When you smell it, ooh, that smells like nail polish remover. What that smell is hunger. I'm gonna give it a feeding, but this time I'm gonna increase the ratio because I wanna give it a little bit more to work with. I know you guys hate this, but I'm still not saving this discard because it's just not recommended to consume at this point. Currently there's 180 grams in here. I'm gonna remove all but 30 grams and I'm gonna feed it a 1 to 2 to 2 ratio. 1 part starter, 2 parts water, 2 parts flour. I'm just gonna add 100 grams of flour in here. I do a lot of eyeballing, honestly. Once you get used to doing this, you'll be able to do that too. I'm just trying to get numbers so I can tell you, but otherwise I would just eyeball this. I'm gonna use 100 grams. I think that looks good. Give it a really good mix. Use this to try to clean the sides. Just gonna scrape it as clean as I can. If you wanted to, you could take like a rubber band and wrap it like right around here so you could see throughout the day if you see it rising at all. Also, I just want to show you, look how soon you're gonna start to see air pockets. I don't know if this is gonna work. Okay, let's just try. Okay, can you see that? I'm gonna check in on it in a few hours to see if it's risen. All right, it has been a few hours and I checked on it. Look at it. Look at our line. We're already having doubling. If your starter is doing this, That's amazing. If it's not doing this yet, that's okay. Anyways, I'll see you tomorrow for a feed. This is day 8 of making a sourdough starter from scratch. So today we're just gonna do another feeding, and this is the line I drew yesterday, and we had a rise and fall, which you should see, and you should continue to see activity. Our starter is just getting a lot more hungry because that yeast is really developing, so it's requiring a little bit more sustenance per feeding. At this point, I am not gonna measure out what I'm discarding. I'm just gonna dump probably most of it. I wanna give it like a lot more flour and water. I think it can handle it at this point. Dump it into my discard bowl. I'm not weighing it. I don't know why I have it on the scale. Let me just scrape more out. Mostly empty. There's probably about a tablespoon in here. And I'm gonna add 60 grams of flour in here. I'm gonna do 60 grams of the lukewarm filtered water. Now I'm kind of just playing this by ear and seeing how my starter is looking before I feed it. Scrape the side with a spatula here. A lot of you were asking, can I start out with a really small amount of flour and water when I'm starting this process? And like I said in the very first video, you can start out with whatever amount of flour and water that you want, just as long as you keep the ratios. And now just cover it, leave it on the counter, and I'll see you tomorrow. This is day 9 of making a sourdough starter from scratch. We are still going strong and seeing a lot of activity in here. You really shouldn't see it go dormant unless it gets too cold or it gets too hungry. I'm actually going to switch it into a clean jar at the advice of somebody who commented and mentioned that if you leave crusty sides on for too long, you could encourage mold to get in here. We don't want to do that, so I'm gonna just switch over to a different jar. One way that your starter can mold is if it gets too dry, because it's not sitting in that nice acidic environment, because it's really the acidity of the starter that prevents it from molding and bad things getting in. Actually, she is smelling a lot better today. A little bit of the nail polish remover, but not super strong. Definitely noticed a lot of people have gotten upset at the idea of having to discard every single day, which I totally understand because it seems very, very wasteful. But I just want you to keep in mind that you only have to throw away the discard at the very beginning. Once your starter is active, you can save the discard. I'm eyeballing this. And then, oops. And then I'm gonna add in the water. I always double check the water to make sure it's not too hot, because if your water is hot, you could kill your yeast, and that would be really sad. Pour this in, mix it. I get a lot of questions about how exact you have to be about these measurements and the numbers. And truthfully, I just give you measurements and numbers just so you have something to go by. But honestly, all of this is approximations. It's not an exact science. I mean, it is a science, but it doesn't have to be exact. I really need my wooden spoon. This is an example of how I would close it if I had a mason jar. See this little top that it comes with? I'm just gonna set that on there. You could put the ring on, but don't twist it. I'm just gonna leave this on the counter and I'll see you tomorrow. This is day 10 of making a sourdough starter from scratch. I'm feeling really good about the starter right now because it doubled and it has consistently doubled for the past couple days. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start building my starter up in this jar. This is safe to consume. You could put this aside and bake something else with this. But basically, I'm gonna avoid discarding because I wanna build up some starter in here so that I can bake with it. When your starter can go a little bit longer without a feed and not smell like acetone, that is a good sign. I'm gonna measure out about 30 grams. Might do like 20 grams actually. That's exactly 20. Stick with the 1 to 2 to 2 ratio. So I'm gonna add 40 grams of flour. Cut my baby spoon. Now I'm gonna add 40 grams of lukewarm filtered water. Now I'll give it a good mix. And what you wanna do, because this is kind of earlier in the day, so I'll be able to monitor it. Over the next 4 to 8 hours, I want you to watch it and see if it does any doubling. If it doubles in size, it's a really good sign. I'm still gonna feed it for about 2 days if it does double, because I wanna make sure that it's consistently doing a predictable rise. Smooth it out a bit so you can watch the level a little bit more. So tomorrow, I'm not gonna discard, I'm just gonna keep adding. I just mixed it, and look, you can already see bubbles because that is how quick the starter acts when it's active. I'm gonna mark it now. I'm gonna do a line right here. I'm gonna come back sometime between 4 and 8 hours, and I want this to be double the height at least. I'll see you in a few hours. So it's been about 9 hours since I fed this, and I'm just checking on it. Here is the line that I drew, and it's not quite doubled, which doesn't really surprise me because it's been really cold in my kitchen, but I am happy with this. I'm not going to discard any of it tomorrow. I'm just going to add flour and water to this. And as you can see, the problem with not discarding, if I add the same amount of flour and water in here, it's going to be like right here. And then if it's right here and it doubles, we're already like at the top. I'm thinking maybe the day after tomorrow I can bake a loaf. I'm gonna try to do feed first thing in the morning just so I can monitor it throughout the day. I'll see you guys tomorrow. This is day 11 of making a sourdough starter from scratch. I've already done the feed. So yesterday I did 20 grams of starter, 40 grams of water, and 40 grams of flour. I made that a total of 100 grams of starter in here. So I added 200 grams of flour and 200 grams of water. As you can see, it doesn't take much for these things to become halfway full. So that's what I mean by discarding tends to be important, because you don't want it to just overflow the jar. As we're gearing up for bake day, I want to show you guys what you need to be successful and make sourdough. You don't need any fancy equipment. The most fancy thing that you absolutely need is a scale. Once you try a recipe where you're just using grams, it's actually so much easier and you're gonna prefer to bake this way. The next thing you're gonna need is something to bake it on. You can use parchment paper. Make sure it's parchment and not wax paper. And I just get the bulk kind from Costco. When I decided that I was gonna start making sourdough more often, I bought these, which are just like things that you can put the sourdough on. It basically just acts as the parchment paper and it makes it really easy to transfer it. The other thing that you see a lot of people who make sourdough use is this, and these are called bannetons. So your dough will sit in here and that's what you refrigerate it in. You don't have to have this. If you don't want to buy that first, all you're gonna need is a decent sized bowl and paper towels. I'm a big proponent of use what you have, but if you really want to make it a hobby, invest in the things that make it a little bit easier. Most people bake sourdough in a Dutch oven. This is what I use. This is actually a stock pot that I got. This is from our place. It's been very well loved, but I use this for everything. And it is oven safe up to 450 degrees, which is great because that is what you need to bake your sourdough at. If you have 2 loaf pans in your kitchen, you can use this in place of a Dutch oven. It's gonna be a little bit different, the result will be, but you'll just cover it like this and that'll be your lid. I'm gonna leave this on the counter and I'll see you guys later. This is it many hours later and it's doubled. You can see that it had a peak and it's come down. I want to try to mix together a sourdough tomorrow morning. So I'm actually going to dump most of this so that I can feed it again. And I'm going to save the discard now so that I can make something with it tomorrow. So, now I'm just going to cover this discard and leave it on my counter. Now I'm going to feed this so that I can hopefully make a loaf tomorrow. I'm gonna say this is about 30 grams and I'm gonna feed it with bread flour tonight. I'm gonna feed it 150 grams of bread flour, 120 grams of lukewarm filtered water. I'm just kidding, I'm gonna add 10 more grams of water. So 130 grams of water, 150 grams of bread flour. Kind of looks like slime.